The Atlantic Ocean stretched endlessly beneath gray March skies. Cold winds whipped across Norfolk Naval Base in Virginia. The date was March 5th, 1943. History was about to witness something unprecedented. Deep inside the naval base, preparations were underway. An encrypted message had arrived from the 10th Fleet. The contents would change everything. Captain Giles Short stood in his cabin aboard USS Bogue. The message in his hands contained intelligence that would reshape the war. Ultra had broken German codes. Enemy submarine positions were no longer secret. Milk cow refueling submarines had been located. U-459 and U-487 were scheduled to meet wolf packs. Their coordinates were known down to the minute. The secure telephone rang. An operations officer reached for the handset. One escort carrier would lead the hunt. 4 destroyer escorts would provide support. USS Bogue would command. USS Belknap, USS George E. Badger, USS Osmond Ingram, and USS Clemson would follow. None of these men understood what they were beginning. This single deployment would trigger the most devastating reversal in naval warfare history. Within 8 months, German submarine dominance would crumble. Admiral Karl Dönitz would withdraw his entire fleet from the Atlantic. The mathematics of war had become simple. Sink more tonnage than the enemy could replace. Victory would follow. Lose submarines faster than they could be built. Defeat was certain. German U-boats controlled the shipping lanes. March 1943, statistics told the story. Wolf packs had destroyed over 80 ships, nearly 500,000 tons sent to the bottom. April would be worse. Over 600,000 tons would be lost. The peak of German submarine warfare. The numbers seemed to favor Germany. 20 new U-boats entered service monthly. Fewer than 10 were being destroyed. Admiral Karl Dönitz commanded from his headquarters in France. Over 400 submarines answered to him. His Wolfpack tactics had nearly severed Britain's lifeline. Convoys SC-121 and HX-229 had been massacred. Winston Churchill would later admit his greatest fear. The U-boat threat was the only thing that truly terrified him throughout the entire war. USS Bogue represented American industrial might. 9,800 tons of steel and determination. 890 men called her home. Her flight deck stretched 495 feet into the Atlantic wind. 12 F-4F Wildcat fighters waited in her hangar. 9 TBF Avenger torpedo bombers completed her air wing. But her greatest weapons remained invisible to German eyes. Centimetric radar operated on wavelengths German equipment couldn't detect. High-frequency direction finding gear could pinpoint radio transmissions with deadly accuracy. Hidden in Avenger bomb bays was America's secret weapon, the Mark 24 mine. Its real nature was carefully disguised. The Fido acoustic homing torpedo. Everything about hunter-killer warfare was revolutionary. Traditional convoy escorts could only react to attacks. They faced impossible choices. Pursue submarines or protect merchant ships. Hunter-killer groups had no such limitations. Their mission was simple: find U-boats. Destroy them. Wherever they operated. Lieutenant Commander Howard Avery would soon command Composite Squadron 9 aboard Bogue. He understood submarine vulnerabilities from convoy experience. U-boats were most exposed during 3 critical periods: surfacing to charge depleted batteries, meeting supply submarines for fuel and torpedoes, transmitting radio reports to Dönitz headquarters. German submarine doctrine demanded constant communication. Position reports every 24 hours without exception. Contact reports immediately upon sighting convoys. Weather observations transmitted twice daily. Damage assessments after every attack. Each transmission was a potential death sentence. Allied direction-finding stations triangulated every signal. Radio silence meant tactical blindness. Communication meant revealing location to waiting hunters. Kapitän zur See Hans Johansen commanded U-569 somewhere in the Atlantic. 7 weeks at sea had drained fuel reserves to dangerous levels. Radio instructions directed him to a rendezvous point. Milk Cow U-459 waited at coordinates 50 degrees 40 minutes north, 35 degrees 21 minutes west. Johansen had taken command in early 1943. His predecessor, Hans-Peter Hinch, had led the boat through earlier patrols. U-569 was a Type 7IC submarine, the workhorse of the German fleet. She displaced 769 tons surfaced, 871 tons submerged. 14 torpedoes filled her tubes. 44 men crewed her hull. Her 4 bow tubes and single stern tube had accounted for modest success. 1 merchant ship sunk, another damaged. These results reflected the increasingly dangerous Atlantic environment. But submarines retained their fundamental weakness from the Great War. Diesel engines needed air for combustion. Electric batteries required hours of surface charging. A Type CVC could remain submerged 18 hours at economical speed. High-speed evasion drained batteries in less than an hour. American hunter-killer groups exploited these limitations with scientific precision. Search patterns were calculated to maximize radar coverage. Aircraft patrol schedules were timed to catch surfaced submarines. Attack protocols maintained continuous pressure until batteries died. At 14:20 hours on May 22, 1943, everything changed. TBF Avenger pilot Lieutenant William Chamberlain detected a radar contact. Range 18 miles, bearing 090 degrees, relative. He pushed his control stick forward. The attack run began. U-569 was running, surfaced at 15 knots. Her diesels charged batteries after a night of evasion. The bridge watch spotted the approaching aircraft at 8 miles. Alarm bells rang throughout the submarine. Johansen ordered emergency dive. Crash dive procedures for Type 7IC submarines required 35 seconds. From alarm to periscope depth. Ballast tank vents opened with rushing air. Diesel engines stopped abruptly. Electric motors engaged with humming power. The submarine's bow angled sharply downward. Tons of seawater flooded her tanks. Lieutenant Chamberlain's depth charge pattern caught U-569 at shallow depth. 4 Mark 17 depth charges were set for shallow detonation. The explosions damaged the submarine severely. She was forced back to the surface. Second Avenger pilot Howard Roberts was already positioning for attack. Roberts began his run immediately. Then he observed white flags appearing on the submarine's periscope. The crew was surrendering. Canadian destroyer HMCS Sackville was vectored to the scene. As she approached, Johansen made his final decision. He ordered his crew to scuttle the boat. Abandon ship procedures began immediately. 25 of 44 crew members survived. They were pulled from the freezing Atlantic water. 19 men went down with their submarine. The ocean claimed them forever. Captured survivors from U-569 provided valuable intelligence during interrogation. German submariners expressed complete shock at American aircraft accuracy. They knew exactly where we were, one survivor stated with bewilderment. It was as if they could see through the ocean itself. Ultra-intelligence had revealed far more than individual submarine positions. Cryptanalysts at Bletchley Park had decoded the entire German naval grid system. Patrol areas were mapped precisely. Wolfpack assembly points were identified. Supply rendezvous coordinates were known in advance. Every U-boat at sea was potentially compromised. Their movements tracked. Their intentions predicted. their destruction planned with mathematical precision. June 5, 1943, brought another demonstration of American dominance. USS Bogue's aircraft located U-217 charging batteries on the surface, 450 miles west of the Azores. Dawn was breaking across the Atlantic. Kapitänleutnant Kurt Reichenbach-Klinke commanded the submarine. 3 patrols had seasoned his crew. 3 ships totaling 10,651 tons had fallen to his torpedoes. Experience meant nothing against what was coming. Aircraft from Bogue attacked at dawn. They caught U-217 in the vulnerable moments before diving. The first Avenger's depth charges damaged her diving mechanism. Unable to submerge, Reichenbach-Klinke ordered his gun crews to engage attacking aircraft. Damage control teams worked desperately to repair diving planes. The surface engagement lasted 18 minutes. U-217's 88mm deck gun fired continuously. Her 20mm anti-aircraft weapons spat defiance at circling aircraft. Over 300 rounds were expended. 1 Wildcat sustained minor damage from shell fragments. But the submarine was fighting a losing battle. She faced aircraft specifically designed for anti-submarine warfare. An Avenger from Bogue's squadron delivered the killing blow. Depth charges bracketed the submarine perfectly. The explosions destroyed U-217's pressure hull in multiple locations. The submarine sank with all 50 hands. Reichenbach-Klinke went down with his boat. No survivors were recovered from the spreading oil slick. The ocean marked her grave with petroleum rainbows. Radio intercepts revealed the psychological impact immediately. Growing anxiety spread among submarine commanders. American wonder weapons seemed to find targets regardless of evasion tactics. Morale reports spoke of crews reluctant to surface. Even essential battery charging became terrifying. Admiral Dönitz responded with tactical modifications. U-boats were ordered to transit the Bay of Biscay submerged. Surface refueling was restricted to darkness hours. Radio transmissions were reduced to absolute minimums. These measures only delayed the inevitable. Americans had momentum and technological advantages. Tactical changes couldn't overcome systematic superiority. By June 1943, 5 hunter-killer groups prowled the Atlantic, each centered on an escort carrier. Destroyer escort screens provided protection. USS Bogue, USS Card, USS Kor, USS Santee, and USS Croatan represented industrial capacity Germany could never match. USS Card, commanded by Captain Arnold Buster Isbell, would become legendary. Between July and October 1943, Card's group would account for 8 confirmed U-boat kills. She would earn the first Presidential Unit Citation awarded to a hunter-killer group. Card's techniques became standard doctrine throughout the fleet. Aircraft patrolled in expanding box patterns from the carrier's position. Surface radar contacts triggered immediate attacks. Submarines that crash-dived were marked with dye markers. Destroyer escorts pursued using Hedgehog mortars and depth charges. August 7, 1943, demonstrated the devastating effectiveness of these tactics. Card's aircraft located Milk Cow U-117 refueling U-66 on the surface. The supply submarine was caught with fuel hoses still connected. Crash diving was impossible. Lieutenant Charles Stapler's Avenger attacked immediately. 4 depth charges straddled U-117 perfectly. The explosion of over 400 tons of diesel fuel created hell on Earth. A pillar of fire rose from the ocean. The flames were visible from 30 miles away. U-66 managed to crash dive, but sustained damage from the blast. She would survive this encounter. 9 months later, she would meet her fate in one of the war's most unusual battles. Kapitänleutnant Klaus Bargston commanded U-521 from periscope depth. He witnessed U-117's destruction with growing horror. His war diary captured the shock spreading through U-boat ranks. The Americans appear everywhere simultaneously. Their aircraft arrive without warning. Their weapons are impossibly accurate. We are no longer hunters, but the hunted. October 1943 marked a turning point that would define the war's remainder. The U-boat arm lost 23 submarines that month. Several veteran commanders who had survived since 1939 were among the dead. Each loss represented irreplaceable experience. Training schools couldn't replicate such knowledge. The destruction of milk cow submarines proved particularly catastrophic. U-488, U-489, and U-490 were all sunk within weeks of each other. Without refueling capability, Type 7C boats could no longer reach the American coast. Patrol areas contracted to the mid-Atlantic. Hunter-killer groups waited in growing numbers. USS Corps' hunter-killer group refined the doctrine of continuous air coverage. Aircraft maintained contact over suspected U-boat zones for days at a time. Submarines were exhausted through relentless pursuit. This technique proved devastatingly effective against even experienced commanders. October 13, 1943, brought another example of American dominance. Corps' group caught U-378 on the surface at dawn. The submarine's commander, Oberleutnant zur See Erich Maeder, had just celebrated his 26th birthday. His inexperience showed in his response to attack. Maeder attempted to fight on the surface rather than crash diving immediately. 4 Wildcats strafed U-378 mercilessly. 2 Avengers positioned for depth charge runs. The submarine's anti-aircraft gunners managed to damage 1 Wildcat. Then machine gun fire swept them from the conning tower. Maeder ordered abandon ship as depth charges shattered the pressure hull. Only 1 survivor was pulled from the water. The brutality of these encounters shocked even veteran U-boat crews. Korvettenkapitän Heinrich Bleichrodt exemplified the shock experienced by German aces. He was one of Germany's top commanders, with 24 ships sunk. In October 1943, he barely survived an attack by USS Block Island's aircraft. His submarine U-109 limped back to port with extensive damage. Bleichrodt never sailed again. He told fellow officers with haunted eyes, "The Atlantic has become a slaughterhouse." November 1943 brought new American innovations that tilted the balance further. The introduction of mad magnetic anomaly detectors allowed aircraft to detect submerged submarines at shallow depths. Sonobuoys dropped in patterns could track submarine movements for hours. The technological gap was becoming insurmountable. Kapitänleutnant Rolf Heinrich Hauptmann commanded U-405 through 7 successful war patrols. His experience and tactical skill had kept his crew alive. He had survived encounters that destroyed lesser boats. He had developed techniques for evading aircraft using cloud cover and rain squalls. October 31, 1943, found U-405 operating with Wolfpack Seeräuber. USS Card's hunter-killer group arrived in the patrol area. Destiny was approaching at 20 knots. Destroyer USS Bori gained radar contact at 2100 hours. Range 6,500 yards. What followed would become legendary in naval history. U-405 crash-dived but was forced back to the surface by depth charges. Unable to dive again due to damage, Hauptmann decided to fight on the surface with deck guns. In darkness and heavy seas, the vessels collided. Bori's bow rode up onto U-405's foredeck. For several minutes, the ships were locked together. Crews fired machine guns, pistols, and threw hand grenades at point-blank range. American sailors hurled coffee mugs, shell casings, and in one case a sheath knife at German gunners. The surreal combat continued until the vessels separated. Lieutenant Commander Charles Hutchins, Bori's captain, ordered all weapons to bear on the submarine. Over 4,000 rounds of ammunition were expended as U-405 attempted escape. The submarine's conning tower was riddled with holes. Her deck gun was destroyed completely. Her hull was punctured below the waterline. Hoffman ordered abandon ship as U-405 settled by the stern. Only 8 of 49 crew members survived the freezing Atlantic. Hoffman was not among them. Bori herself was mortally damaged in the encounter. She would be scuttled the next day. The engagement demonstrated that even the most experienced U-boat commanders could no longer survive determined hunter-killer attacks. Experience, courage, and skill meant nothing against systematic superiority. The technological revolution enabling hunter-killer success extended beyond radar and homing torpedoes. Operations research scientists had developed optimal search patterns using probability theory. Acoustic analysis could distinguish individual submarine propeller signatures. Statistical models predicted U-boat behavior based on thousands of observations. High-frequency direction finding proved particularly devastating. German submarine doctrine required regular radio reports. These were necessary to coordinate Wolfpack attacks. Each transmission lasted only seconds. That was sufficient for Allied stations to triangulate positions within 2-mile radius. U-boat commanders faced an impossible choice: maintain radio silence and lose tactical coordination, transmit reports, and reveal position to waiting hunters. Either choice led to destruction. The Germans believed their Enigma encryption system remained secure. They didn't know that captured codebooks from U-559 in October 1942 had broken the 4-rotor M4 cipher. Every operational order from Dönitz to his submarines was being read by Allied intelligence, often within hours of transmission. December 1943 saw the destruction of veteran U-boats that had survived since the war's early days. U-172, commanded by Kapitän-Leutnant Hermann Hoffmann, had sunk 26 ships, totaling 151,000 tons. Her crew was considered elite. They had developed innovative tactics for penetrating escort screens. December 13th brought USS Bogue's hunter-killer group into contact with U-172 in the mid-Atlantic. The submarine had just transmitted a weather report. Her position was betrayed by direction-finding stations in Bermuda and the Azores. The first attack came from Lieutenant Junior Grade William Fowler's Avenger. He dropped a Fido homing torpedo. U-172's acoustic operator detected it in time to evade, but evasion required high-speed maneuvering. Batteries drained rapidly. Within 2 hours, 3 more aircraft had arrived to maintain contact. For the next 14 hours, U-172 played a desperate game of survival. She surfaced briefly to ventilate the boat, then crash-dived when radar detected approaching aircraft. At 800 hours on December 14th, batteries were exhausted. Compressed air reserves were depleted. Hoffman had no choice. Surface and remain surfaced. U-172's anti-aircraft guns engaged circling aircraft. Damage control teams attempted futile repairs. The surface battle lasted 43 minutes. Destroyer escorts USS George E. Badger, USS Clemson, USS DuPont, and USS Osmond Ingram converged on the submarine's position. They fired over 400 rounds from their main batteries. U-172's hull was penetrated in 17 locations before she finally sank. 46 of her 57 crew members were lost. 11 survivors were pulled from the water. During interrogation, they revealed the depth of despair among U-boat crews. The ocean has become a trap. We cannot hide, we cannot run, we cannot fight effectively. Every patrol is expected to be our last. By early 1944, the transformation was complete. The U-boat force that had nearly starved Britain was being systematically destroyed. January saw 19 U-boats lost. February brought 20 more. March claimed 23 submarines. The arithmetic of destruction was relentless and accelerating. Young, inexperienced commanders were being sent to sea with minimal training. Oberleutnant zur See Wolfgang Hader commanded U-434. He was 23 years old. Less than 6 months of submarine experience when Card's aircraft caught his boat on the surface in March 1944. He ordered his crew to fight rather than dive. A fatal decision that resulted in the loss of all hands. The quality gap between American and German forces widened with each engagement. American pilots accumulated hundreds of hours of anti-submarine patrol experience. Radar operators learned to distinguish submarine signatures from surface clutter at maximum range. Acoustic operators could identify individual U-boats by their distinctive propeller sounds. They could track specific boats across thousands of miles of ocean. German submarine crews, conversely, were becoming younger and less capable. The average age of U-boat commanders had dropped from 32 to 26 years. Veteran petty officers who formed the backbone of submarine operations were increasingly rare. Boats sailed with crews who had never experienced combat. Officers led them who had graduated from abbreviated training programs. Admiral Dönitz's son Peter exemplified this tragic trend. The younger Dönitz served aboard U-954 as a watch officer. May 19, 1943, brought the submarine into contact with British escorts. She was caught on the surface and sunk with all hands. The loss of his son did not deter the admiral from sending other young men to similar fates, but it underscored the personal cost of the failing U-boat campaign. Spring 1944 brought new American innovations that made U-boat operations virtually suicidal. The introduction of centimetric radar on all hunter-killer aircraft eliminated the last sanctuary of darkness. Lee lights turned night into day. Surface submarines were illuminated from miles away. Even the most experienced commanders could no longer evade detection. Technology had trumped seamanship completely. May 6, 1944, brought USS Buckley into one of the war's most bizarre encounters. The destroyer escort located U-66 on the surface west of the Cape Verde Islands. Oberleutnant zur See Gerhard Seehausen had commanded the submarine through 9 patrols. He had sunk 33 ships. His experience meant nothing against the forces arrayed against him. Unable to dive due to battery depletion, U-66 attempted to ram Buckley. The two vessels collided at 15 knots. Their hulls ground together in the darkness. German and American sailors exchanged small arms fire at point-blank range. The surreal combat included sailors throwing coffee mugs, shell casings, and hand grenades between the vessels. Lieutenant Commander Brent Abel's crew fired 105 3-inch shells, 2,700 rounds of 20mm ammunition, and 418 rounds of 40mm shells in 16 minutes. U-66's hull was perforated in dozens of locations. The submarine sank with 24 of her 48 crew members. The hand-to-hand combat represented the death throes of an era. Submarines could no longer operate as surface raiders. The capture of U-505 on June 4, 1944, represented the ultimate demonstration of American dominance. Captain Daniel Gallery's hunter-killer group from USS Guadalcanal achieved the impossible. The boarding party from destroyer escort USS Pillsbury descended through U-505's conning tower while the submarine was still underway. Seawater was flooding through damaged valves. They closed sea cocks, stopped the flooding, and saved the submarine from sinking. The intelligence value was enormous. Code books, cipher machines, acoustic torpedoes, and technical manuals fell into American hands. But the symbolic value was greater. U-boats were no longer fearsome predators. They had become prizes to be taken. Their crews were prisoners rather than warriors. The invasion of France in June 1944 brought hunter-killer groups into the Bay of Biscay. They hunted U-boats, attempting to attack invasion shipping. The confined waters became a killing ground. 15 U-boats were destroyed in the first week of June alone. Survivors described attacks by dozens of aircraft simultaneously. Escape was impossible. The ocean had become transparent to American eyes. Captain Lieutenant Herbert Werner was one of the few U-boat commanders to survive the war. He described the experience of facing hunter-killer groups with haunting clarity. We would detect aircraft on our radar, crash dive, and within minutes hear the splash of sonobuoys above us. Then the escorts would arrive, maintaining contact for days. We would surface, gasping for air, only to find aircraft already waiting. It was systematic extermination. August 1944 brought Donitz's order to evacuate French bases. Allied armies were approaching. U-boats attempting to reach Norwegian ports faced continuous attack from hunter-killer groups positioned along their route. Of 31 boats that attempted the passage, 11 were destroyed. The survivors arrived with extensive damage and exhausted crews. The introduction of the snorkel breathing tube allowed submarines to run diesels while submerged at periscope depth. This innovation came too late and proved inadequate. Snorkel-equipped boats were still vulnerable to radar detection. They could only make 6 knots while using the device. It represented defensive adaptation, not offensive capability return. September 1944 saw deployment of the most advanced hunter-killer technologies yet developed. The Mark 24 Fido torpedo had been improved with greater range and sensitivity. New Hedgehog mortars could saturate areas with contact-fused projectiles. Radar could detect periscope-sized objects at 5 miles range. The technological mismatch had become absolute. No German innovation could close the gap. Fregattenkapitän Günther Kuenke commanded U-1000. He witnessed the destruction of 3 other submarines in his wolf pack during a single night in October 1944. His war diary recorded the despair spreading through the force. The enemy possesses capabilities we cannot counter. They strike without warning, with perfect accuracy. We are not fighting men anymore, but machines that never tire, never miss, never show mercy. The final months of 1944 saw U-boat losses reach unsustainable levels. November brought 24 boats lost. December claimed 27 submarines. New construction could not keep pace with destruction. Training facilities were bombed. Fuel supplies dwindled. The U-boat force was dying and everyone knew it. Yet Dönitz continued to send boats to sea. He was driven by Hitler's demands and his own refusal to accept defeat. Young men who should have been in school were given command of submarines after hasty training. Entire crews sailed on their first and last patrol simultaneously. The hunter-killer groups had transformed the Atlantic from a battlefield into an execution ground. Systematic destruction had replaced combat. The story of U-396 exemplified this final phase. Her commander, Oberleutnant zur See Ernst Günther Unterhorst, was 22 years old. His entire crew averaged age 20. They sailed from Norway in November 1944. USS Corps' hunter-killer group detected them within 3 days. The pursuit lasted 18 hours. When U-396 finally surfaced, her batteries were dead and air was exhausted. She was immediately destroyed by waiting aircraft. There were no survivors. Winter 1944-45 brought the snorkel-equipped Type 20 submarines into service. These boats could sustain 16 knots submerged. They possessed advanced sensors, but only 2 became operational before war's end. The hunter-killer groups had won the race against German technical innovation. They achieved victory through sheer weight of numbers, through systematic destruction of the existing U-boat force. The statistics told the complete story. In 1942, U-boats sank 1,160 Allied ships, totaling 6.2 million tons. In 1944, they sank 132 ships, totaling 773,000 tons. The hunter-killer groups had reduced German submarine effectiveness by 90%. At peak production, American shipyards launched over 140 Liberty ships per month, nearly 3 every 2 days. Each carried 10,000 tons of cargo. The tonnage war's arithmetic had become impossible for Germany. By March 1945, the U-boat force existed largely on paper. Of 463 boats nominally available, fewer than 60 were operational. Most remained in port, lacking fuel, torpedoes, or trained crews. Those that sailed faced certain destruction from hunter-killer groups that had perfected their craft through 2 years of continuous operations. The final humiliation came in April 1945. U-546 attacked USS Frederick C. Davis, part of USS Bogue's screen. The destroyer escort sank, but within hours, U-546 was hunted down and destroyed by the remaining escorts. It was the last U-boat killed by Bogue's hunter-killer group. She brought her total to 13 submarines destroyed. Admiral Dönitz's final war diary entry regarding submarine operations contained bitter admission. The enemy's superiority at sea, particularly in the field of science and technology, has torn from our hands the most effective weapon we possessed. The submarine war has ended in defeat. The transformation had taken less than 2 years. In March 1943, U-boats had nearly severed the Atlantic lifeline. They were sinking ships faster than Allies could build them. By March 1945, the U-boat force was effectively extinct. Its remnants cowered in ports or faced methodical destruction at sea. The hunter-killer groups had achieved this reversal through systematic application of superior technology, intelligence, and industrial capacity. They had transformed submarine hunting from an art requiring intuition and luck into a science demanding precision and persistence. Every aspect of anti-submarine warfare had been optimized through operational research and practical refinement. USS Bogue ended the war as the most successful hunter-killer group with 13 confirmed U-boat kills. USS Card claimed 11. USS Core destroyed 6. These escort carriers and their screens had sunk more submarines than traditional fleet units could have imagined possible. But their greatest achievement was not in numbers, but in methodology. They had demonstrated that modern warfare would belong to nations capable of integrating intelligence, technology, and industrial production into unified combat systems. Individual skill and courage, while still important, could not overcome systematic disadvantage. The romantic era of submarine warfare had ended forever, where skilled commanders could overcome material odds through cunning and determination. That age had passed into history. The shock experienced by German U-boat captains was not merely tactical, but existential. They had entered the war as elite warriors, the grey wolves who would strangle Britain's maritime lifeline. They ended it as hunted animals, trapped between an ocean they could no longer hide in, and a homeland they could barely reach. Korvettenkapitän Peter Kremer was one of only a handful of U-boat aces to survive the war. He would later write with painful honesty, "We had no answer to the hunter-killer groups. They possessed every advantage. Radar we couldn't detect, weapons we couldn't evade, intelligence that revealed our every move, and most importantly, the ability to be everywhere at once. We went from predators to prey in what seemed like overnight. The human cost was staggering beyond comprehension. Of 40,000 German submariners who went to war, 30,000 never returned. A casualty rate of 75%. 784 of 1,162 commissioned U-boats were destroyed. The loss rate for boats on their first patrol exceeded 50% by war's end. Entire graduating classes from U-boat school were wiped out within months of completing training. The ocean floor became a cemetery for German youth. American losses, by contrast, were minimal. The hunter-killer groups lost only one escort carrier in the Atlantic. USS Block Island was torpedoed in May 1944. Fewer than 10 destroyer escorts were lost throughout the entire campaign. The exchange ratio that had once favored U-boats by 10-1 had reversed to favor Americans by 20-1. The tactical innovations developed by hunter-killer groups influenced naval warfare for decades. The integration of air and surface assets became standard doctrine. The use of intelligence to direct operations was revolutionary. The application of operational research to optimize tactics was unprecedented. Modern navies incorporated all these lessons. The Cold War's anti-submarine warfare relied heavily on techniques learned in the Atlantic. But perhaps the most profound impact was psychological. The U-boat force had represented German naval power and technological prowess. Its destruction by American hunter-killer groups demonstrated that industrial capacity and scientific advancement would determine future conflicts. The age of individual heroism had yielded to the era of systematic warfare. Technology, not courage, would decide naval battles. In May 1945, as Germany surrendered, remaining U-boats received Donitz's final order. Surface, fly black flags, and proceed to Allied ports. Of 49 boats that complied, many were commanded by officers younger than 25. Their crews were composed of teenagers who had never seen combat. They surrendered to hunter-killer groups that had been preparing to destroy them with the same methodical efficiency that had characterized the entire campaign. The systematic nature of their planned destruction was almost anticlimactic. The last operational U-boat patrol ended on May 7, 1945. U-320 was sunk by British escorts. Her commander, Oberleutnant zur See Helmut Emmerich, was 24 years old. He and his entire crew of 36 men represented the final casualties of a force that had once threatened to change the war's outcome. Post-war analysis revealed the elegant efficiency of hunter-killer operations. Search patterns had been optimized using probability theory. Mathematical models predicted submarine behavior. Weapon delivery was calculated to maximize kill probability while minimizing ammunition expenditure. Communication intercepts were correlated with operational patterns to predict U-boat movements. Every element had been refined through rigorous analysis and practical application. Science had triumphed over intuition. The greatest shock for German U-boat captains was not the loss of tactical superiority. It was the speed and completeness of its occurrence. In March 1943, wolf packs had nearly severed Atlantic supply lines. By November 1943, U-boats were being hunted to extinction. Their bases were under constant surveillance. Their communications were compromised completely. Their every movement was predicted and countered. This reversal occurred not through any single technological breakthrough. It happened through systematic integration of multiple advantages. Radar that could detect submarines day or night in any weather. Aircraft that could patrol for hours hundreds of miles from base. Weapons that could find targets regardless of evasion attempts. Intelligence that revealed enemy intentions before they were executed. Industrial capacity that could replace losses faster than the enemy could inflict them. The hunter-killer groups had written the first chapter of modern naval warfare. Victory was determined not by individual courage or skill. It was decided by systematic superiority across multiple domains. They had transformed the Atlantic from a vast hiding place into a transparent battlefield. Every movement was observed. Every transmission was intercepted. Every mistake was punished with destruction. Admiral Donitz spent 10 years in Spandau prison as a war criminal. He contemplated the destruction of the force he had built and led. His post-war memoirs contained a telling passage. I had believed that courage and determination could overcome material disadvantage. The American hunter-killer groups taught me that in modern war, technology and industrial capacity are decisive. We were not defeated by better sailors, but by better systems. The legacy of the hunter-killer groups extends beyond their wartime achievements. They demonstrated that future naval warfare would be determined by integration of air and surface forces, by fusion of intelligence with operations, by application of scientific methodology to tactical problems. The nuclear submarines of the Cold War were equipped with sophisticated sensors and weapons. They were direct descendants of concepts proven by escort carriers and destroyer escorts in the Atlantic. In the cold depths of the Atlantic Ocean, over 500 German submarines rest on the ocean floor. Their steel hulls slowly dissolve into the abyss. They are monuments to the devastating effectiveness of American hunter-killer groups. These groups transformed submarine hunting from desperate defensive measure into offensive campaign of systematic destruction. The young men who commanded these doomed vessels had entered service believing they were joining an elite force. They expected to determine the war's outcome. They discovered instead that they were facing an enemy who had transformed warfare itself. Combat art was replaced with destruction science. Their shock at this transformation echoed through the ranks of the U-boat force. It ultimately echoed through naval history itself. The German U-boat force had entered 1943 as masters of the Atlantic. Their wolf packs savaged convoys with near impunity. They ended it as hunted fugitives. Their bases were bombed. Their supply lines were severed. Their experienced crews were dead. Their remaining boats cowered in ports or fled from relentless pursuit. The shock of this reversal would resonate through naval history. It marked the moment when technology, intelligence, and industrial capacity forever changed the nature of warfare at sea. The American hunter-killer groups of 1943 to 1945 had shocked German U-boat captains, not through superior seamanship or courage. Both sides possessed these qualities in abundance, but through systematic application of overwhelming technological and industrial superiority, they transformed the ocean from sanctuary into killing field. Precision, not valor, determined survival. The final statistics were irrefutable. The hunter-killer groups and their allied counterparts had sunk 784 German U-boats. They had killed 30,000 German submariners while losing fewer than 5,000 of their own men. They had reduced the U-boat threat from near victory to complete defeat in less than 2 years. It was not merely a military victory. It was demonstration that the nature of warfare itself had fundamentally changed. The era of the lone wolf submarine operating independently through stealth and cunning had ended forever. The future belonged to integrated naval forces. They employed sophisticated sensors, weapons, and intelligence in coordinated operations. The hunter-killer groups had not just won the Battle of the Atlantic. They had revolutionized naval warfare. They shocked their enemies with the completeness of their transformation from hunted to hunter.